What's going on? Welcome back. Wildcast podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Tucson.com. You guys know me, Justin Spears. Here's my cohort, Michael Lev, senior writer and columnist for Arizona football coverage this season. Make sure you go to Tucson.com. Also, download the Wildcaster app. It's free. Lots of great stuff on the Wildcaster mobile app, not just from myself and Lev, but you also have basketball season right around the corner. Tommy Lloyd had a press conference at McKale Center. Bruce Pascoe was there. You got women's basketball starting up training camp. PJ Brown is doing a lot of great things. And we have a new community sports editor in Elvia Verdugo, who's going to be helping us get more stories that are away from the University of Arizona. We got a lot of cool things on that app, so download it today. Lev, we got a very interesting podcast this week with Arizona going on the road and playing against number 10 Utah. This is after a 24-point beatdown by Kansas State in Manhattan. They went into a bye week. They were able to rest, but they probably faced their biggest challenge of the year going up against the preseason Big 12 favorites in Utah. It's at their place in Salt Lake City. Utah is 34-3 at home since 2018. They just don't lose at Rice-Eccles Stadium. So it's safe to say that these struggling Arizona Wildcats, albeit they're 2-1, a lot of people would love to be 2-1 right now, but they got a big test, and it looks like they might be heading towards 2-2.
We all thought heading into the season that this would be a game that they probably would lose. Kind of felt the same way about the Kansas State game, but it isn't whether they lose, it's what they look like along the way. And the Kansas State game was not competitive after the first quarter. I mean, it was close. It was 14-7 at halftime, but Kansas State pulled away. Arizona never really seriously threatened them. Just didn't look good, in any phase of the game. And that has a lot of people freaking out, frankly. I mean, from what I read on social media and message boards, it feels like we're covering the worst team in the country.
Right.
Justin, I mean, they're not good at anything. The coaching's no good. The offense is no good. I feel like it's a major overreaction. This is a new coaching staff. There are a lot of new players. They lost a lot of really good players. There were bound to be some bumps along the way.
Yeah.
And I think they're experiencing that a little bit. I think the bye came at a perfect time for them to kind of reset. Focus on the fundamentals, do some self-critiquing, examine the playbook a little bit, figure out what plays work, what plays don't, keep these, toss out these. Brent Brennan's been talking a lot about details and the importance of those details when it comes to route running, especially when the passing game just hasn't been clicking the way that we became accustomed to last year. So I don't know. I'm strangely optimistic heading into Saturday, despite what the odds makers are saying and despite the history that you cited when it comes to Utah playing in their home stadium.
And Arizona and Salt Lake City, too. They haven't won there in a decade. Last win for Arizona in Salt Lake City was in 2014. So it's been a while since Arizona has had a victory in Salt Lake. But Lev, I look at this game and I see that the spread right now is about 12.5, I think, is last time. Is that our official spread for this week?
I think I've got it a little lower than that. I've got it at 11.
So that's a really tough spread. And I just think about the things that Utah does well, because I watched the game against Oklahoma State, and I was just so impressed with how much they limited Ollie Gordon, the Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. Oklahoma State tried to get him going, but he was limited to, I think, 48 yards. A rare performance by Ollie Gordon, but credit to Utah's defense and that front seven. I mean, I know they've been dealing with some injuries. There's been an injury in the secondary also at linebacker, but it seems like the guys, they just have depth. Every typical Kyle Whittingham team, that even if they get banged up, they have a next man up mentality and guys that could just step in and play right away. And they stopped Oklahoma State's run game, made them one-dimensional. They made him so one-dimensional that Alan Bowman got pulled from the game. He was playing that bad. And despite 3 turnovers, Utah didn't play a totally perfect game. They turned over the ball 3 times. They look shaky at times, but for them to go on the road and play a top 15 team like Oklahoma State in Stillwater and still have a handle on that game, like Utah, I had my doubts about them going into this year. All my doubts are completely out the window. Like this team, regardless of who's playing quarterback, they look like a bona fide college football playoff team. And all the things that they excel at, Arizona struggles with: running the ball, stopping the run, penalties. And I think that this matchup just does not bode well for Arizona.
Well, I mean, you forgot to mention that they not only went on the road and won, they won with a freshman quarterback.
Yeah.
I believe making his second road start because he had started the previous week against Utah State. And that game was at Utah State, future Pac-12 member Utah State. So the Utah Utes are number 3 in the Big 12 in scoring defense, 13 points a game. Number 2 in total defense, 260.8 yards per game. Number 4 in rushing defense, 93.8 yards a game. They allow only 44.6% of passes to be completed against them. They are tied for first in the league in sacks. They will suffocate you.
Yeah.
Even though the score of that game was 22-19, it was not that close. Oklahoma State kind of scored a couple times late. They were in control the entire time.
Yeah.
They were basically like, it was a classic Utah type of performance. Physical, ball control. At the time of possession in that game was 42-32 for Utah to 17-28 for Oklahoma State. I have experienced those games before, Justin. Like, I feel like I've covered that exact game in Salt Lake City or here in Tucson with Utah and Arizona. Arizona cannot allow that to happen. They have to sustain drives. They have to keep Utah off balance. Ideally, make Utah play from behind.
Yeah.
Assuming that Isaac Wilson is the quarterback, we don't know that. We won't know that until you're, telling us at about 5:45 p.m. Saturday what you're seeing on the field during pregame, whether Cam Rising's going to play. And even last week he was warming up and still didn't play.
Yeah.
But they can't allow Utah to play its game. The problem is it's really hard to prevent that from happening, especially when they're at Rice-Eccles Stadium.
Yeah. It doesn't bode well for Arizona, but I feel like a week off, getting healthy, right? We don't know the status of some guys. Traden Stukes is kind of a questionable, maybe a game time decision type of player. It's good to see Dalton Johnson back. We spoke with him at the press conferences this week. So I think Arizona getting healthy, I think, is going to really benefit them. And I'm just really curious to see how this line looks because, if you thought Kansas State was physical, I think Utah is even more physical. Like, this might be the biggest test all season long for both the offensive and defensive line. And I agree with you, Lev. I think for Arizona on offense, I think establishing the run, pretty much replicate what you did in that first drive against Kansas State. Have balance, but also, don't be afraid to lean on the run. Get your offensive line with some confidence. And if you could take care of the ball and continue to play ahead, then I think if you can get down to the wire, you have a chance to win. But so many teams go into Rice-Eccles Stadium, and like you said, they fall into that trap that Utah sets up where they just dominate time of possession. So
yeah, they're a super physical team. Going back to the Kansas State game, if the officials had given Arizona a favorable spot on that 4th and 1 sneak and given them the ball, and they were able to take a 10-0 or 14-0 lead, might have been a different game.
Yeah.
Might have been a different game. So it's really important. I always feel like how you start is super important in these road games. They started like perfectly against Kansas State. They couldn't sustain it for a variety of reasons. I think Utah is like Kansas State plus.
Yeah.
You've heard the nouveau order. Like, I would like my steak medium rare plus. Utah is Kansas State plus. They're just like everything that Kansas State does, but a little bit better. Except they don't have an Avery Johnson level athlete at quarterback. That's probably the biggest difference between the two. I thought it actually
they can still run.
Oh yeah, no, they can for sure. That was interesting that Dwayne Aquina compared them to Stanford a little
Yeah.
bit. Like when Stanford really had it going, and they always seem to have like 4 or 5, like 6'7", 260-pound tight ends who could catch a ball, down the seam.
The
He
Zach
was talking
Ertz of the
about,
world.
correct me if I'm wrong, was he not saying that they would play sometimes that Utah would play 14 personnel?
Yeah.
Like, I didn't like, that's what, 1 running back and 4 tight ends?
Yeah.
Is that what that is?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah,
Or
I'm not really
lined up in
familiar with
some
that.
way, some
Yeah.
sort of way. Yeah. It's very much like service academy football. And Utah uses the tight ends a lot in a lot of different ways. Like Brant Keithy, I noticed they put him
He had
in
a rushing touchdown.
at
Yeah.
Wildcat. And I'm like, yeah, because how are you going to stop a 6'6", 250-pound freight train at the goal line? So
He's a
this is
great
going to be
athlete.
huge test for Arizona. And I also think the biggest key to this game, and it really played into their downfall at Kansas State, the penalties. And we saw initially at the start of the season, their penalty issues were kind of coming on the defensive side of the ball. And then it went into the offensive side of the ball. The holding call on Jonas Avianai against Kansas State, yeah, whatever. That was not a holding call. But there were some penalties where it was like, come on, guys, you guys are really hurting yourselves right now. And I asked, Dwayne Aquina about this, and he actually lauded Dorian Singer for his competitive nature. But I noticed in the game that Utah played against Oklahoma State, Dorian Singer was a little chatty. Like he would make some plays and kind of boast himself a little bit and pound his chest and talk to the defenders. And against Arizona, against guys like Takario Davis, who had a couple of unsportsmanlike conduct penalties at the start of the year, I just feel like Dorian Singer is going to do whatever he can to bait the Arizona guys. And it's always, more often than not, the reaction is the one that gets the flag. And so I think if they don't play into Dorian Singer's game or any other, Utah player, if they could play clean and stay away from the penalties, then I think they have a fighter's chance.
They absolutely have to have, and hopefully they've already had this conversation, like, do not engage with Dorian Singer. Just don't go there. Make the play, stand up, and walk away. Do not, like, hey, if you win the game and the game's over and you want to chirp at him, that's fine. But do not, those penalties will absolutely kill you. The offensive miscues were of the holding, false start, illegal formation variety. They really killed them on that one drive when the game was still in the balance. And those things happen on the road. Again, especially when you have some inexperienced players playing on the offensive line. I would like to think that Rhino Tapatotai will be in better physical shape for this game and will also benefit from the experience that he got playing at Kansas State. Remember, this kid is a redshirt freshman.
Yeah.
That was his first road start. That was his second ever start.
Mm-hmm.
And he's coming off a leg injury.
First full game.
Yeah. First full game that he ever played. So it's not that surprising that he gave up a bunch of pressures. Hopefully he will improve a lot during that game. I couldn't help but notice, Justin, that on Tuesday, the 2 players they brought out were Noah Fafita and Kian Burnett. And they played together in high school. They're sitting 2 feet apart from each other. Like they're so close to each other. And I kept thinking to myself, why can't these 2 like connect like this on the field?
Right.
Like what is missing here? Dino Babers, he implied that Kian was not 100%.
Owies.
Owies. There was that play. I can't remember again who was against. It was one of the 2 home games where Kian got flipped on the sideline and landed really hard on his back. I wonder if maybe that was something that was slowing him down. But look, you saw it. I saw it. People have questioned me on Twitter, like, you don't know what you're talking about. Maybe it's because he was going against Arizona's defense. I am telling you, Kian Burnett looked like he was on the verge of an absolute breakout season.
Yeah.
And he's been basically persona non grata through 3 games. They've got to develop that underneath element, that second or third receiving outlet, because Utah is a very well coached team. They always have good players in the secondary. They're going to blanket Tetero McMillan in this game. So that means everyone else is going to have one-on-one coverage. And some other guys are going to have to step up. I still believe Kean Burnett is someone who conceivably could do that and be that second weapon that really can do some damage against the secondary.
I mean, tight ends, period. We thought, man, in training camp, they're using the hell out of the tight ends. Like Sam Olsen, Kean Burnett, Roberto Miranda was like, hey, I know he's not going to be Antonio Gates, but man, repping 85 and catching some passes, like, hey, now tight ends might be a little different in this Arizona offense. We might be seeing Arizona playing more like Stanford using those tight ends. And we saw 12 personnel, tight ends motioning and being lined up as a fullback. Now, they have used some of those packages, right? They haven't completely ignored it, but I thought the tight ends were going to be like the bread and butter of the offense outside of the connection with T-Mac. And of course, the running backs would get involved too. But yeah, it's a little head scratching. Like 7 catches for, I think, 70 yards out of all the tight ends this year through 3 games. Those are numbers that I'm a little confused with. But I think maybe we could start to see Kean Burnett and those guys get involved more. Maybe Rayshon Speedy Luke at running back could get involved more in the passing game. They
started to utilize him a little bit more in that way against Kansas State. I would also I wouldn't mind seeing them mix in some fly sweeps, whether that's to him or to Jeremiah Patterson to get him an easy touch. I've been playing the NCAA College 25 video game quite a bit, Justin, while I've been convalescing here.
Did you have a quarterback leave for NIL, that money that you did not promise?
I did not.
Do you have a UNLV situation?
No. Everyone seems pretty happy in Tucson in my pretend world. But I utilize that play. It's the little shovel pass, where the receiver comes in motion, and that's a nice changeup. Again, it's an easy way to get the ball into your playmaker's hands. It forces the defense to cover the width of the field. Need to see a little bit more of that. I thought they showed more variety in the game against Kansas State, but obviously the results weren't there. They scored 7 points on the first drive and didn't score again.
So keys to victory for Arizona, Lev. Defensive line, I think, has to contain the edge, whether it's Wilson or Cam Rising. Those guys, they can peel off for some runs when they want to. So I think containing the edge, defensive ends, and finally getting to the quarterback. You can praise Chase Kennedy and Trey Smith for all those quarterback pressures, but I think the sacks matter more than QB pressures. So figure out a way to put pressure on the quarterback, stopping the run, which is going to be, it's easier said than done because, Bernard is leading the Big 12 in rushing. And I just think penalties and not getting caught by the bait, I think that's going to be key for Arizona. What say you?
I got a couple. I would say matching or at least approximating Utah's physicality.
Absolutely.
And in both ways, your offensive line against their defensive front and your defensive front against their offensive line. That's one. And then assuming that it's Wilson at quarterback, and again, we don't know this, but if it is, you got to throw some changeups at the kid. We cannot, you cannot come out and play base the entire game.
No.
Give me some, what is that, the double eagle flex or whatever that?
Yeah, double eagle flex defense.
Yeah, the one they played against. Throw some of that in there. Give him some wrinkles. You got to confuse the kid. He started 2 games. He's thrown 3 picks in those 2 games. He threw 2 picks last week. This is not a polished product. So that would be another key for me in this game. And then I think the third thing, it's kind of a mental thing, but just play with some confidence.
Yeah.
Try to remember who you were not that long ago, the team that had the longest winning streak in college football, right? Who coming into the season, sure, Utah was the favorite in the Big 12, but you're right there. There's no reason that you can't play with that team. And the start of the game, like I said, will probably play into that quite a bit. That usually has a big influence on your mentality. Didn't work out at Kansas State, but again, get off to that good start, get some positive vibes going, build that confidence up, and then see what happens from there.
And also, to go with that, Lev, when you get down, because there is a good chance that Utah goes up in this game, if you're down by a touchdown or two, don't just let it avalanche like it did against Kansas State. And that was one thing that was so impressive about last year's team was they had fight. I mean, the games that they lost against Mississippi State, all those turnovers, and then they were right there at the end in overtime. Washington, the national runner-up, yeah, you fell behind by 2 touchdowns, but they only lost by 1 score, and they were competitive down to the end. At USC, you take them to triple overtime, and you lose to the defending Heisman Trophy winner by 2 points in triple OT. It's just that team had so much fight. They had their backs up against the wall in San Antonio for the Alamo Bowl. And then thanks to takeaways and their confidence, they were able to get back into that game. And I didn't see that kind of fight against Kansas State. And I don't know if that's maybe the players are going through some growing pains with the coaching change, or if that's a reflection on the coaches. I just don't know. But
I don't know. There was also the Stanford game last year where Noah had to come in off the bench. They were losing in that game, rallied and hung on to win 21-20. The Colorado game, they really struggled in the first half, had to kind of battle their way back, ended up winning on a walk-off. Yeah, that team had a certain, I don't know if swagger is the right word, but like just a self-assuredness about them. They were going to be in every game, and they were going to win the majority of the close games.
Like when I talked to Tyler Loop this year for my feature on him, he was saying when Arizona got the ball to start that game-winning drive against Colorado, like Jed, the guys on the sideline were like, we're going to win this game. We're going to go down, like, Loop, get ready. We're going to kick a field goal. We're not even going to score, give them a chance. Like, we're going to go down and kick a field. We're going to win this game. And, like, they had that mentality all the way through. And then Tyler Loop, with their operation, walks out with ease, walk-off field goal like it's nothing. I know it was a chip shot, but still, like, I don't know. That team had a swagger, and I think this year's team is missing it. I think they can find it, but they got to do something this week against Utah.
Do you remember when Matt Hasselbeck was playing for the Packers and they had the overtime coin toss and the Packers won, and he goes, "We want the ball and we're going to score." It was a very funny, it's a very funny moment, but they kind of need, I think they need that a little bit, like I know that portraying yourself as an underdog can be a great motivational tactic. But I feel like in this game, they need to go in there believing they can win.
Yeah.
And not this. I mean, he might do the no one believes in us thing. Maybe that is what they need. I don't know. But I feel like they need to go in and hey, they beat Utah last year and they beat them handily. So that probably helps in that regard more than a little bit. Tyler Loop, by the way, seems like he's now the kicker and punter. I mean, they have had a different punter in every single game so far. Brent Brennan cited the operational time getting the ball off is kind of the biggest factor. Obviously, the first punt was something of a disaster. But yeah, I don't know. It wasn't what I was expecting. I still don't think it's like a good thing necessarily for that to be the case. But he was the guy. He actually punted pretty well after the first one, so.
The one that was returned for a touchdown. It's kind of low, got a good bounce.
Kind of perfect bounce. Yeah. It was a perfect bounce. A perfect storm, if you will.
Yeah, it was just an avalanche for Arizona, but they took their lumps. They go into the bye week, or they went into the bye week with a 2-1 record. We thought that they would be 2-1 at this point of the season, maybe even 2-2, because Utah is a really good team. We'll have a full breakdown of Arizona versus Utah later on with our picks. I don't know if you guys can hear Barkley going nuts in the background, but all right, Lev, let's go into Big 12 Bonanza. Let's look at this week's slate of games. Arizona officially begins Big 12 play. It finally is coming down to conference play, Lev. Now we can talk about Arizona in Big 12 play. They got Utah coming up here this week. They got Texas Tech, late one at home next week in Tucson at 8 p.m. Big 12 after dark. Not too happy about that.
You'll be yes. Everyone will be shocked to know that Arizona plays the last game of the day, both weeks, of course. Like that part was never really going to change. The only difference, I think, going into the Big 12 is some of the road games will be earlier. That's the benefit. The home games were always going to be in those nighttime windows. That's why the Big 12 wanted to have the four corner schools, because they're in the Mountain Time Zone, or some of the year in the Pacific Time Zone, and you can fill up those late TV windows. But one of the cool things about the Big 12 is you get games all day long. And we will start this week's slate with Oklahoma State and Kansas State. They're both still ranked despite losing last week. Oklahoma State's number 20, Kansas State's number 23. Oklahoma State is visiting Kansas State, so they're going to the Little Apple. This game is at 9 a.m. on ESPN, and Kansas State is favored at home by 4.5 points. As you mentioned earlier, Alan Bowman was benched during the game last week, but he did come back and play, and he is expected to start this week. Despite the score being 22-19, the yardage told a different story. It's 456 to 285. Kansas State got absolutely smoked at BYU, but that was a weird game. There was a lot of big plays in that, like, I guess what you would call the middle eight stretch, as Jed Fish used to talk about all the time. Interceptions, punt return that went in BYU's favor. Kansas State actually outgained them in that game, if you can believe that. It was 367 to 241. I think Kansas State is still, at worst, the second best team in the Big 12. I think they will bounce back. I think Oklahoma State is maybe a little bit overrated. Haven't been able to get their run game going. Questions at quarterback. I like K-State at home. I'm going to lay the 4.5 points and take the Wildcats.
Yeah, give me the Wildcats too. I think that they pretty much got a taste of their own medicine by going on the road and playing against BYU. BYU had a fumble return for a touchdown. They had a punt return for a touchdown. So BYU had a lot of good things going. And Arizona, they look at that BYU crowd and how rowdy that atmosphere was. And it's going to be a tough stretch for Arizona with these road games at Kansas State, at Utah, at BYU, Central Florida for the space game. Tough road stretch for Arizona this season. But going back to this game, I think that Kansas State finds their mojo on the ground again. And I like the Wildcats outrunning Oklahoma State in this game. I'm going with Kansas State by 7.
All right. The contrarian, Brett Farah, our sports editor, who's not on the podcast tonight, he's taken Oklahoma State to win outright. So how about that?
Okay.
Yeah, Brett. He sometimes likes to go the other direction. All right. So there's another 9 a.m. game. This one's on FS1. This features number 22 BYU at Baylor. Baylor is favored in this game by 3.5 points, despite the outcome of last week's games. As I just mentioned, BYU actually was outgained by KSU in that game. They will not have that great home field crowd. Man, what a gut punch of a loss that was for Baylor last week. I mean, that's the flip side of Colorado's crazy comeback, Hail Mary, and all that stuff. Is like someone had to lose that game. So big test for Dave Aranda, who's already on the hot seat down there, to get his team in the right mind frame for that game. But some encouraging signs. They outgained Colorado 432 to 314, and they had 8 sacks in that game of Shedeur Sanders. So I am going to take Baylor, the team that really needs this game badly for their coach, to win and cover that 3.5 points.
You know, Baylor actually has one of the better defenses in the Big 12. They have the third best defense in the Big 12. However, number 2 is BYU. I think defense travels. I'm going with the Cougars to upset the Baylor Bears in Waco. And I think that seat gets a little warmer for Dave Aranda. That loss to Colorado, that was so gut-wrenching, and that might be the loss that derails them this season. I hope not, because I like Dave Aranda. I think he's a good guy, but I like the Cougars. I like what they've showed so far. I think they remain undefeated after this week.
All right, Brett agrees with you. He is also taking BYU in that game to continue their momentum. All right. In the 12:30 window, we've got two more games. We've got Colorado visiting UCF. This game is on Fox. Colorado is getting 14.5 points in this game. That is the line where they are just begging you to take the Buffs. Colorado left for this game on Wednesday because of Hurricane Helene. I think that's what it's called, right?
Yep.
Concerns about the weather, travel, etc. They want to get to Orlando, get themselves into their hotel, make sure that they're safely on the ground. Weather could definitely play havoc still on this game that entire weekend in Florida. So that's something to keep an eye on for sure. In that loss, or in the win over Baylor last week, Colorado was outrushed again, 166-91. That does include sack yardage, which is pretty significant. UCF averages 375.7 rushing yards per game.
Yep.
That's a lot.
We're talking about 1 versus 16 in Big 12.
Right. There are some people who think that this is Oregon 2.0 for Colorado. Last year, they had that super emotional down to the end win against Colorado State. The next week, they come out and get absolutely blasted by Oregon. I don't think UCF is as good as that Oregon team was. I think Colorado is better this year than they were last year. So I'm going to take the points. I'm going to take the 14.5. I think UCF is going to win, but those playmakers that Colorado has, they can keep you in a game. They can give you a backdoor cover. They can make things interesting.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that UCF in Orlando, it's going to be really tough to keep up with their offense. And I think the Colorado defensive line is going to get tested. We're talking about the best rushing team in the Big 12 and one of the best in college football. UCF under Gus Malzahn, they have an identity. And, I knew that they could be a dark horse in the Big 12, but they certainly look like one of the better teams in the conference. But like you said, those playmakers, guys like Travis Hunter, I think Jimmy Horn Jr., Webster, LeJontay Webster, the guy who got the game-winning touchdown pass there at the end. Those guys will keep you in games. So I think UCF will win, but Colorado will cover.
Yeah, Brett is going with the same. UCF to win, CU to cover. Quick aside, Justin, we're both Heisman voters. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
If things keep going the way they're going, I am most definitely going to put Travis Hunter on my ballot.
At least on the ballot, yeah.
At least on the ballot. Whether he wins or not remains to be seen. It depends on how other guys do and so forth. But whether he does win or not, I think it's indisputable that he's the best player in college football. Kind of like when Shohei Ohtani was pitching and hitting and doing both at a super high level. How could you dispute that he's the best player in baseball? I don't know if I've ever seen anyone like Travis Hunter, do what he does, play as many snaps as he plays. It's really incredible.
And be so good no matter where he's at. Yeah.
Just awesome. I cannot wait for when they come in here and he's following Tetero McMillan all over the field. We talked about earlier, there's going to be so many scouts at that game.
We got
watching that matchup.
Him and T-Mac, and then, Takario Davis. Hey, you want to prove that you're a potential first-round pick? There you go.
True. Yeah, that's true. All right, the other 12:30 game, TCU at Kansas. This is the ESPN Plus game this week. Kansas is favored in this game by 1.5 at home. Kansas is reeling right now.
Yeah.
One of the teams that was considered, one of the favorites in the league. They're 1-3. They've lost 3 games in a row, all by one score. They had a 28-17 lead with about 5 minutes left against West Virginia and blew it. They also lost to UNLV at home. They lost by 6 points at Illinois. I think I had Kansas in all 3 of those games, and they let me down. All that being said, I'm going right back to the well. Again, I'm going to take the Jayhawks to win this game. This is a desperation game for Kansas. And I think Lance Leipold is a really good coach. Meanwhile, on the other side with TCU, there's a little bit of chaos going on over there. I mean, Sonny Dykes got ejected from the Iron Skillet game. I keep wondering if he's on that Ed Orgeron track where you win the national title and about 2 years later, you're out of a job. That talk might be premature. But whether it is or isn't, I'm taking Kansas in this one.
This is a really hard game to pick, just because Kansas has been so disappointing this year. And I'm sure they're probably like, damn it, why couldn't UNLV have all these issues 2 weeks ago when we played them out here in Kansas? I think Sonny Dykes is coaching for his job right now. I think even if Lance Leipold, even if they have a down year, like they would pretty much have to lose out in order for this man to lose his job. He's not getting fired after this year.
No.
Sonny Dykes, that's a little bit of a different story. I think TCU shows more of a fight, so I'm going with the Horned Frogs to win.
All right, Justin's taking TCU. I like it. Okay, the other, now we're moving on to the 4:00 window. Iowa State, ranked 18th in the country, visiting Houston. This game is on FS1. And the Red Hot Cyclones are favored by 14 points in this game against the Cougars. You know who ranked Iowa State higher than anyone else in the country this week, Justin? That would be your boy right here. I ranked them 11th.
This guy.
In my AP poll. This guy. I mean, in large part because it was just kind of a void. I did the top 10 and I'm like, there is no one to put at number 11. Like Missouri, they didn't deserve it. They have not played all that well, even though they keep winning. Michigan, even though they beat USC, they're a very one-dimensional team right now. They can't pass the football. Iowa State looked great against Arkansas State. I thought Arkansas State would give them a game. It was not a game at all. It was complete domination in every shape and form. Iowa State has one of the best defenses in the Big 12. Houston has perhaps the worst offense in the Big 12. They are desperately searching for a quarterback. Zion Chris is going to play this week in addition to Donovan Smith, who has 2 touchdowns and 4 interceptions on the season. Man, those situations where you're playing more than one quarterback, that's never a good sign.
Yeah.
So I am going to lay the 14 points in this one and take my number 11 ranked Iowa State Cyclones to win and cover against Houston.
Well, guess who had 2 thumbs and put Iowa State number 2 in their preseason Big 12 media poll? This guy. And people gave me a bunch of guff for that. They were like, what? How could you put Iowa State? Now, granted, I did put Utah a little bit lower, and maybe that was an error on my part because Utah looks like the real deal. But I put Iowa State number 2, and people were like, how could you do that? I'm like, they're returning like 90% of their starters. Like they only have a few guys that left from last year's team that went 7-5. So that camaraderie, that chemistry is all coming back, and they have a favorable schedule. I think Iowa State's a legit team. Give me them to win and win big.
Yeah, Brett is also taking Iowa State in this one. Iowa State, by the way, the only road favorite in the Big 12 this week. This next game, a 5:00 game, sneaky, interesting one. Cincinnati at Texas Tech. This game is on ESPN2. The Red Raiders are favored by 2.5 points. Red Raiders coming off a solid win against what was a really hot Arizona State team. They held them off in that game. Cincinnati absolutely trounced Houston, 34-0. Was not competitive in any shape or form. So I was looking up some numbers here, Justin, that really kind of sent me in a certain direction here. Cincinnati is allowing only 16 points per game, among the best in the Big 12. And Texas Tech is allowing 32.8 points per game, among the worst. It would seem like there's a huge difference between the two of them. Well, if you look at yards allowed per play, Cincinnati's at 6.1. Texas Tech is at 6.2. So they might actually be a lot closer than you think. Texas Tech or Cincinnati has been really good in the red zone. They've allowed only a touchdown percentage of 22.2%, which is second best in the league behind Iowa State at 20%. So that might be a reason that they are not allowing a lot of points. but I'm going to take Texas Tech in this one. Cincinnati's been really good at home. They've been really good overall, actually. I mean, their only loss, they were way ahead against Pitt. I think they're a team on the rise, but I like the Red Raiders in Lubbock to cover that 2.5 and come out with a win here.
I'm going with Cincinnati to pull off the upset in Lubbock. One thing about Cincinnati, they are one of the top teams in the Big 12 when it comes to forcing fumbles. If they can, force some takeaways, they have a pretty solid defensive line. Shout out to your boy, the Godfather, right?
Dante Corleone, yep.
Yeah, great name. Great name. Give me the Bearcats to pull off the upset.
Okay, we have one more game. That's Arizona at number 10 Utah. As mentioned earlier, the spread is 11 points. This is a 7:15 p.m. kickoff here in Arizona, 8:15. If you happen to be in Salt Lake City, like Justin will be, it'll be a late night for Justin.
Yeah.
To be sure, we've got the Dave Fleming, Brock Osweiler, Stormy Buontanami team on ESPN. I think they're pretty good. They're a pretty good broadcast team covering this game. So as mentioned, Utah's done a lot of Utah-esque things so far this year. We do not know at this time who their quarterback is going to be. If it is Isaac Wilson, he has thrown 3 picks in the last 2 games. He also is capable of, as a rusher, if you take out the sack yardage, he's been sacked 3 times for 25 yards and losses the last 2 games. If you take that out, he's got 7 rushes for 75 yards. That is a concern when you're Arizona and you've done a pretty terrible job against mobile quarterbacks. I do think it is advantageous for the Wildcats to have had this bye, facing a team that's coming off a road game where they had to play in literally over 100-degree heat for an entire afternoon in Stillwater. So I think that helps. Despite all of the advantages that we have cited for the Utes, I think I'm going to take the points at the least. I'm going to take those 11 points, take Arizona to cover, but I do think Utah will win. And if Arizona can come out of this game with losing by 7 and looking like they belong on the same field as Utah, I think people will start feeling better about things, especially compared to how they're feeling about things right now.
Yeah, this is really tough to pick because Arizona is 0-3 against the spread this season.
And they were great against the spread last year.
Yeah.
And among the best in the country.
And I just look at the things that Utah does well, and Arizona, we were wondering, are they going to show it against Kansas State? And they didn't show any fight. I'm not trying to, punch down on Arizona or overreact and say oh, the sky's falling. But I do think they are going to lose, and I do think that Utah will cover. I initially was going to say 42-28, but I feel like Utah is just even with Isaac Wilson at their quarterback. I don't think it matters who's playing quarterback because I think they're just going to try to suffocate Arizona because if you have a running advantage against Arizona's defensive line this year, it is proven that you could run against this defense. And if Arizona's defensive line isn't gap sounded, if they aren't making plays behind the line of scrimmage, I think it's just going to be a long day for Arizona. So until I see it, I'm going to pick against the Wildcats, and I will go with Utah 34, Arizona 20.
Yeah, I mean, I could see the game ending up something like 30-17. But it could also be maybe 27-17, in which case the 11 points would get you a point spread victory. Brett is also going with Utah to win and cover. By the way, Justin, I forgot to give the standings when we started the Bonanza segment. I thought there'd be some separation last week. There was not. You and I both went 5-3 against the spread. Brett was 4-4 against the spread. We were all 5-3 straight up against without the spread. For the season, straight up, Brett and I are 23-9. You are 22-10. Nice. You and I are both 16-16 against the spread, while Brett is 15-8 and 17. So much like the Big 12 Bonanza, this is a very close, tightly packed race.
Lots of parity, lots of Jeff Fisher records in there.
One might say mediocrity.
All right, so big one between Arizona and Utah in Salt Lake City, 7:15 p.m. kickoff. It's going to be a fun one. Saturday night, it's a dark mode for Utah. It's their first night home game of the year. Rice Eccles Stadium.
I like those black uniforms a lot.
Very
They're really
slick.
sweet. Yeah,
And
like you said on Twitter, I think you have to counter that with the stormtrooper look. Right?
And white face mask. Go all white.
Yeah.
Everything. Arizona's got a pretty good record over the last couple of years with the all white look. So we'll see if they roll it out. All right, that'll do it for this episode of the Wildcast. Arizona versus Utah. Big one coming up in Salt Lake City. For all of our coverage, go to Tucson.com and download the Wildcast app. And as always, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and comment the Wildcast podcast wherever you get your podcasts.